So obviously welcome, I'm Dan Chilori, I'm one of the Kingston organisers of the Socialist Party in Kingston obviously, and I'm here to chair this session on Kill the Bill, on how we're going to defeat the anti-union laws that are currently being driven through Parliament. Many will have been on the demonstration on Monday, the catastrophically organised demonstration would probably be the best way to describe it by the TUC, and of course the third reading of the trade union bill is going to take place next Tuesday, and I think we'll all agree that as so far the campaign against the trade union bill has been woeful and has been badly led by the TUC, as probably most of us expected. But of course there is a way to defeat this bill going through, and all the other anti-union laws that are currently law in this country, and that's what this meeting is about how we defeat these anti-union laws and all the other anti-union laws as well. We've got two fantastic speakers, Rob Williams on my right here, who's the National Chair of the National Shop Stewards Network and the Socialist Party's Industrial Organiser, and Bill Mullins on my left here, who is a former Industrial Organiser of the Socialist Party. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Rob first of all, and give him about 10 to 15 minutes to speak.
Right, comrades, well, there it is. That is the trade union bill as amended in the committee stage in Parliament. That is what will be going to Parliament on Tuesday for the third reading, and really this discussion is absolutely urgent because of that third reading. That's the final time that the House of Commons will get to vote on this bill, and then it will go to the House of Lords. Now the Trade Union Coordinating Group, not the TUC, but the Trade Union Coordinating Group of left unions, which I'll talk about later, but it's starting to impose itself. And comrades in this room, John McAnally, who's here from PCS, is going to be speaking at the protest on Tuesday at 6 o'clock outside Parliament, but it's the left unions like the FPU, the RMT, POA, the Bakers Union and others, and really they've started to step in to the vacuum left by the TUC and the major unions. But that protest outside Parliament is really, really important, and really if you're in and around London on Tuesday, then you should try and get there to that protest. But of course if you can't get to London, then can you do something on the day? Can you do something in your workplace? I have, as comrades know, I'm newly on Facebook, but I did Facebook and a tweet out this week that we've done an NSSN sheet which has Kill the Bill on it, and even if you can get something going on social media, can you organise a protest in your area, your town on the day? Is there one being organised? And organise it through your union branch or union, your trades council, or the National Shop Stewards Network. Now if the bill is passed on Tuesday, it'll go to the House of Lords and could be law as early as January or even December. So therefore the fight must really be stepped up. Now of course Cameron will fully expect the Lords to accept the bill, but of course he's been knocked back by the Lords over the last couple of weeks on tax credits. Now, of course, we've got no illusions in the House of Lords that they've suddenly turned into a revolutionary chamber. You know, it's still unelected, it's still, in the vast majority of cases, will act in the interests of the capitalists and of the government. But what that rebellion didn't happen because the House of Lords has suddenly decided that poor people are being kicked enough. It's because they know, they can sense, and even a section of the capitalists and establishment can sense that the Tories, who only got elected by 24% of the electorate, have only got a 12-seat majority, are going too far. But also shows, because we've got to be careful here, we've got to prepare, if you like, for what happens if the bill becomes law. But we've also got to say that even if it goes through on Tuesday, even if it goes to the House of Lords, then the campaign could be stepped up and pressure could be exerted on them as well. And of course, in some respects, they've got nothing to lose. Because if the unions exert pressure over the next couple of months even if it goes to the House of Lords. That's the best preparation for a campaign of defiance if the bill becomes law in that way. I'll give an example, because of course we've been here before. This isn't the first time the Tories have brought in, and you know, Bill is going to talk about this in his contribution. But in early 1971, the Industrial Relations Bill, this is where Kill the Bill, we've, to be honest, the NSSN and the Socialist Party have played a big role really in popularising yet again the idea of not kill Bill, but kill the bill. But that's where it comes from, and the Industrial Relations Bill became the Industrial Relations Act early in 1971. And at that time, the TUC organised a special congress. It took place in Croydon, of all places. Now, I'm not suggesting that happens necessarily next month, but why can't the left unions put the call out for a special congress that would at least exert some pressure on the TUC leadership and the main unions for something to happen? And what that congress, again forced to organise a special congress, could do, could at least set out how the unions could resist that particular law. Now, for comrades who are in unison, in local government, the unison leadership were forced to organise a special recall conference in local government last year on the issue. It was really after the debacle on pay, actually, that conference was recalled. But of course, when you call a special conference, that alone exerts pressure on the leadership. And of course, what it needs to discuss is what we need to discuss. What would happen if a union was fined, which it can do under these new laws, I think up to £20,000 a time, by the certification officer, that from now on the unions are going to have to fund themselves. Talk about the old law where you paid for the bullets in China. You pay for the bullets and then they execute you. Well, that's going to happen if this bill is passed. But what is going to happen if a union is fined? If it took action despite not quite reaching the new undemocratic voting thresholds? What will happen if a shop steward or a union rep is arrested on the picket lines because there's rules under here about a designated picket that you could fall foul of criminal charges? I mean, by the way, there's a big campaign going through the High Court at the moment about blacklisting. What a way to blacklist people this legislation is. And again, Bill will talk about it, but in 1972, then 5 London dockers were arrested because of walkouts, and actually there was mass unofficial walkouts from below that was reaching general strike proportions that forced their release. And it's interesting, when we were debating, the comrades in this room, I know John spoke in the debate in 2012 TUC Congress about the POA motion, about a general strike, and it was said, oh, we've tried that before, you know, in 1926, and it didn't work, we were defeated. Well, of course, that's not strictly correct, because in 1972, you did have a virtual general strike that was organised from below, and of course, it did succeed in getting the release of those dockers, but in reality, damaging fatally, you know, not for a couple of years, but a massive blow against the Industrial Relations Act, but more importantly, raised the consciousness and the confidence of what could happen at that time. In the summer of 1984, the NUM, in the middle of the miners' strike in South Wales, was facing sequestration of its funds, and the Labour Party Young Socialists had a national summer camp in the Forest of Dean, and they went from there, many comrades, some of the comrades in this room at least, Clive Walder in the back, I'll name and shame Clive. But the LPYS, under the leadership of the militant, a Socialist Party now, went to Pontypridd, where the headquarters were, and surrounded the headquarters at that time. That's what needs to be discussed. What's going to happen if the RMT is going to be sequestrated, or the Bakers Union, or the PCS in that ground? But the ground has to be prepared, and Daniel talked about it. The TUC lobby of Parliament showed a glimpse of what could be achieved in reality, because the turnout was far greater than the TUC had bargained for. A couple of thousand turned up at lunchtime on that day, but they hadn't booked all the seats in Westminster central hall, and of course the FBU said that they were bringing their fire engine, and I clambered up and managed to get in to speak. But you know, we need to take that step further, you know, about taking this into the unions, but also locally, about setting up kill the bill committees if this becomes law. The role of the trades councils or individual union branches, or in a particular city or town where there's a number of union branches that are on the left, are militant about saying, look, we've got to organise here. What's going to happen in our area if someone gets arrested, if a union gets sequestrated? And of course, the left on a national basis have to step into the vacuum. That's why I think it is welcome that TUCG was behind the protest that took place Monday evening, but is behind the protest on Tuesday evening, and is also called a conference, a rally, on the 21st of November, back in Westminster Central Hall, which is entitled The Anti-Austerity Fight After Corbyn's Election. But obviously, if this bill is passed, that's going to be a big part of that. Comrades here and comrades we know should come to that conference and take part in that debate, because it's absolutely crucial. Now, you know, it's clear that for all the propaganda of the right-wing media, the fact they're going for the unions at the same time as they're going for a new tranche of cuts shows that the government, but also the capitalists themselves, understand the power of the unions. And of course, this is on the back of some of the attacks that we've already seen. See, all this does, in some respect, is enshrine what we've already seen over the last few years. You know, there's a section here on facility time. Well, comrades here will have had facility time, particularly in the public sector and, of course, in the private sector, cut in the last period. It's enshrining the removal of check-off across the public sector. Well, the comrades in PCS will tell you, they were attacked at the start of this year. PCS said to the other unions in the TUC, they're going for us now. If they get away with it, they'll come for the rest of you as well. Now, I'm not going to steal Fran's thunder, because I got the figures slightly wrong. It was a bit premature, a bit previous it was in the bulletin. But the PCS have done incredible achievement in signing people up to direct debit. The next in the firing line is NAPO, by the way. That union is really but it's going to be everywhere across the trade union movement. Of course, you know, what we need to say as well is that it's a bit like this bill. You know, we want to fight this bill. We think it can be defeated, but let's be clear about it. It's not the end of the story. The idea that this bill being implemented or brought into law will be the end of working class struggle in this country is an absolute fiction. So we have to have a balanced approach. And of course, in some respects, it'll be interesting to see what the comrades in PCS say. But the fact that PCS has had to go into the membership, throw the kitchen sink, there's a positive in there as well. It wouldn't choose to do it, but the idea that that's the end of the story is ridiculous. Comrades, I just want to say a few points. Is that clearly the Tories have been emboldened by the fact that in the first 5 years of the condemned government, they have got away with their austerity. And of course, we need to make the point that was not automatic. The struggle against austerity could have been defeated. The pension struggle in pension strike in November 2011 could have pushed the Tories, could have pushed the Tory-led coalition back. But of course, the leadership of the TUC and the main public sector unions then were terrified. To be honest, they were more terrified of the strike than they were of the Tories' austerity. But I think it's something more deeper than that. And that is this idea that this is just some normal struggle, that this is just a struggle over the last decade or so, that, you know, it's all telegraphed, you know, you do this, we'll take a day out, that'll be sorted, and that'll be over. The reality is, this is a fundamental crisis. This is a fundamental attack by the capitalists that could only be defeated at that stage by generalised strike action, but that was possible in November, December, January 2011, and then into 2012. You know, sometimes you've got to remind yourself of what took place at that time. The demonstrations of November the 30th, 2011 were some of the biggest workers' demonstrations this country has seen for decades, not in one city, but in virtually every town and city across the country. And again, that has opened up the opportunity, as far as the Tories can see, for this particular struggle. And of course, it is not inevitable. You know, I'm not sure what we'll get on Tuesday night, but let's be blunt about it. If there were tens of thousands of people in Parliament Square on Tuesday night, the Tories would be terrified. I mean, we should make the point as well, is that when it goes through the Lords, we have to raise a demand on the TUC leadership and the unions. You have to call a demonstration in the new year against this bill. There has to be hundreds of thousands strong, but more importantly, has to have as a set of demands that there will be mass coordinated strike action. The idea of a 24-hour general strike against these attacks. And of course, see, amongst many of the trade union leaders, is this idea that striking is not possible. I went, last Saturday was a South East Regional TUC conference, and a big part of it was the trade union bill, and they've got a great lobbying strategy out there, you know. It's the MPs this week, it's then they're into the Lords, etc. And of course the idea is they don't think it's popular, but of course it's a nonsense. You know, the bus strike and the tube strike in London stopped London for 4 days this year. They had popular support amongst ordinary people. Look at the junior doctors. I mean, they are one of the pillars, in reality, that section of society of the Tories and the establishment. They have turned against them. They in reality have won concessions of the Tories, and it's not enough. Actually, they could be brought into the struggle. This year, we have seen unofficial strikes by the legal profession. Unofficial strikes against the legal profession on the question of legal aid cuts, etc., could be brought into this struggle. And you know, there are times, there are moments which are a very good indicator of the real mood that exists in society. That woman who was a Tory voter on Question Time, on tax credits, hammered the Tories. That is the real mood that exists. And of course, with regard to Corbyn has been elected because there is an anti-austerity mood in society. And in fact, that anti-austerity mood is actually working for him at the minute. Of course, as we know, we saw with Andrew Fisher yesterday, the Blairites are, you know, not going to accept that, and therefore it's an open question how that struggle will go. But nevertheless, it's that anti-austerity mood that is the prevalent mood in society as well. Comments have to be, there's so much we could say in this, but I just want to draw my conclusions to a close, and we can have a very good discussion. You know, we do not share the pessimism of those people in the movement who think this is a foregone conclusion. This is a Tory government that at the moment is going from crisis to crisis because of the prevailing mood in society, and setting themselves up for a fall, but it's not automatic. That mood has to be built. But you just sense in society that people want to be engaged in a fight if they can be mobilised. And we've seen indications of the last few years. You know, the construction workers protests that took place against the Besna contract. We saw the action against blacklisting, which really were half civil disobedience, half industrial action. We saw the Ovis dispute in Wigan, where you had nightly blockades of that depot by hundreds and hundreds of people against that. And of course, we've seen the strikes this year, particularly since the election as well. The question is for us, though, is what can we do on a national scale, but also on a local level, to build the fight against this bill. If this goes through on Tuesday, the trade union leadership, or the right-wing trade union leadership, will just be looking at a lobbying exercise in the Laws. We're not opposed to that, but it's got to be backed up by a real step up and a campaign against them, which at the root of it has the idea that there has to be mass strike action to resist the bill if it comes in.
Thanks a lot for that, Rob. And pass on to Bill now, who's, as Rob's touched on, is going to talk about what happened in the 1970s when Kill the Bill was the slogan of the day then. So how do we get done?
Comrades, I think Rob's introduction, you know, hit the mark about what's required and what we face today. Now I'm going to restrict my comments to what happened in the past and how the working class, organised for the unions in Britain, defeated the Tories last time and the anti-union laws in the 1970s in particular. And therefore, what lessons can we draw from that period for today? Nothing is automatic, but it's necessary to familiarise ourselves, I believe, with what happened in that decade in particular. And the anti-union laws, you can tell I'm that age, I've got my glasses. The anti-union laws have been in existence almost since capitalism began, from the Combination Acts in the 19th century right up to the early part of the 20th century. Each time the working class moved, the capitalist state used its control of the laws and the courts and parliament to make as many obstacles as possible to stop the working class organising and fighting back itself. But I think what was different about the 1970s was that this was a period after the 25-year boom of capitalism following the Second World War. The working class has never been stronger, the organised working class. 13.5 million were in trade unions. 350,000 shop stewards, and this is mainly in industry at that stage, were organised, and the strike waves on the issues that those workers faced was unremitting. Certainly if you was to look at back copies of the capitalist tabloid press, of the press in general, it seemed there was up the strike every day, and the statistics demonstrate that the working class had never been so prepared to use its own collective strength in defence of its own interests. And I was just talking to Alison Hill before the meeting started, Amazon Now, and she said she remembers when she was in Coventry as a student in the 70s, every day, perhaps it's an exaggeration, quite often there'd be demonstrations going past the college with workers leading the demonstrations in this or that issue that was developing, and it was absolutely true. But what it revealed, because of the power of the working class, organised to the trade unions, the anti-union laws that was developed particularly by the Heath government, which I'll come on to in a minute, was actually swept to one side. There's an old analogy we used to use, that the workers as individuals can be, you know, like a fly flying into a spider's web, can be stopped. But if that fly is now huge, it can just brush through the spider's web, and the anti-union laws were brushed to one side by the millions of ordinary workers who was involved in struggle at that time. And just as the point that Rob made about the absolute lack of faith of the TUC bureaucracy in what the ordinary working class can do, I sent a letter, independent, a few months ago when the anti-union laws have been talked about and introduced, from an USDOR official, or at least an USDOR executive member, who said, these laws ain't bad, except when they attack our right for finance, where we want to finance the Labour Party. And basically we're saying, I don't mind the rest of the anti-union laws in this trade union bill, as long as you don't affect our financial arrangements. There speaks the voice of the right-wing trade union officials who have no grasp of the struggle that's needed to defeat these, or even interested in defeating these anti-trade union laws. But what's often not remembered is that the anti-union laws of Ted Heath, the Industrial Relations Act, large elements of it had already been attempted by the Wilson government in 1968, the Labour government in 1968, in an act, the act was called In Place of Strife. And as soon as they introduced it, they had strife all over the place. There were strikes, there was unofficial strikes, regional strikes. And the TUC said to the Labour government, you dare not introduce this because of the uproar. And Wilson was forced to, and Barbara Castle was the employment minister, remember that big left-winger that we're told on in history? She was in charge of introducing the anti-union laws by the Labour government, which included that the courts would lock up shop stewards if they called unofficial strikes. 99% of strikes in the car industry where I worked were unofficial. The unions never called them. It was called by the shop stewards and mass struggle from below. And therefore, on that basis, there would have been tens of thousands of shop stewards jailed if that law was actually pushed through and actually implemented. But of course, the Wilson government's cabinet split wide open, and Callaghan, who comes from the PCS tradition, comes from the civil service, he was at that stage he was Home Secretary, he was put under pressure, and Callaghan led a rebellion, if you can call it that, inside the cabinet, James Callaghan, inside the cabinet, against the attempt by the Labour government to introduce in place of strife. So that was dropped. So by the end of the Labour government, 1970, workers were so disappointed in the Labour government, not just that, but all sorts of reasons, that the voting that took place, that the Tories come back to power under Ted Heath, it was the lowest vote since 1935 because of the disappointment. Workers voted with their feet and didn't participate. So the Heath government come to power, and almost from day one, its primary target was the unions, and they introduced the whole gamut of anti-trade union laws. And by the way, we have to say that also in that period, the capitalist state was seriously considering how we were going to defeat the unions, how we were going to defeat an enraged working class. And there was a serious talk about a coup, a military coup. Cecil King, who was the Daily Mirror proprietor, was also an MI5 agent. A whole load of MI5 agents got together, and this comes out in the book, The Secret State. And they got together, and they proposed that Lord Mountbatten becomes the new dictator. So this, what was actually seriously discussed. If you want to read about it in Peter Taft's book, The Rise of Militants, the first 25 years of militant. So it gives an indication that the state itself was really consistent. That whether they would have got away with a military coup is another matter. But you think, hang on, this is the country of parliamentary democracy, and here was a serious debate, and that was because of the power of the organised working class was being demonstrated day after day. And the real battle that took place in the 70s, which involved miners, doctors, car workers, engineering workers, the heavy battalions of the proletariat, the organised working class, led massive struggles, and Heath, like King Canute, tried to stop the tide from coming in and completely failed. And in 1970, for instance, in this Industrial Relations Act, it included an industrial license code headed by Lord Donaldson, who became infamous as far as the unions were concerned, and become toothless. And the Industrial Relations Act included 5 main provisions. One, there was a right not to be in the union, and this is in an era of the closed shop, where the engineering, the car factories, they were 100% closed shop, or the pre-entry closed shop, which means you couldn't get a job without getting into the union first. In my case, the union sent me for the job. Or the post-entry closed shop, where you could work in a factory and it was mandatory that you had to be in the union. So that was a big thing for the Tories. They had to try and end that closed shop because it gave a huge organised power to the working class in those workplaces. So they said there was a right for individuals not to be in the union. And there was films made like I'm All Right Jack, right-wing films, Peter Sellers, and all the rest of it, supposed to be Communist Party influenced in favour of Soviet Russia against the interests of Britain. So, there was loads of propagandistic time to take place. The second was that individuals could have contracts with the employers where they could have a no-strike clause in their contract. So even if they're in the union, if they could show they had a contract with no-strike clause, they didn't have to come out and strike. And they'd have a legal backing from the Industrial Relations Act. There was a legal enforcement of management trade union agreements. And if the unions broke those agreements, and the management could go to this Industrial Relations Court, and the unions could be fined for breaking legally enforceable trade unions. There was a legally enforceable registration of trade unions, which, and for instance, one element of that was that if you agreed as a union to become legally registered, then you could have funds off the government to help organise your ballots at that case. So a few unions thought that's a good idea. We'll have a bit of that. The result was 32 unions were expelled from the TUC. Now, Rob mentioned this 1971 Croydon TUC, Special TUC Congress. It was actually a congress of union executive members. There was 2,000 union executive members went to that congress, and that congress adopted a position that they would oppose registration, that any union that registered would be suspended from the TUC. And that happened not just at the TUC level, but throughout the trade union movement. I remember in Birmingham, I was vice president of the Trades Council. There used to be 250 regularly every month come. We had to formally suspend and expel unions like Solga, the print union, and things like that. And it happened all over the place. And you know, you can imagine the tabloid press were going bloody mad. These dictators, but you know, we used the organised strength that we had at that time. And of course, the fifth element to it, the Anti-Union Industrialisation Act, was the Donaldson Court. And that became the main focus for opposition by the organised trade union law. So it's one thing to lay down the law, it's another thing to actually implement it. And it quickly became apparent that the anti-union laws made no fundamental difference to what it is. But I just want to make a point about the role of the Communist Party at that particular time. We had quite a heavy presence amongst shop stewards in particular, the carpenters, the engineering, etc. And they'd organised, when the Labour government tried to introduce in place of strike, an organisation called the Liaison Committee of Defence of Trade Unions. And that the Liaison Committee of Defence of Trade Unions organised the first ever national demonstration, a national strike against the anti-union laws in December the 8th, 1997. The reason I remember that day is because we went to a conference, we said, right, we had a mass meeting at our factory, right, we're going to support this idea. But nobody asked who's calling the strike, we just said, that's a good idea. 8,000 workers on the outside the factory, 8,000 voted, and we all went on strike. And there was continual conferences involving thousands of shop stewards in London, organised by the Liaison Committee of Defence of Trade Unions, and that was obviously the progressive role of the Communist Party. But that was only one side of it. The other side of it, which we haven't got time to go into, they began to play a malevolent role, if that's the right, in the actual unions with the idea of holding back struggle. And actually at one time the Communist Party headquarters in Britain, King Street, actually disowned the Liaison Committee for Defence of Trade Unions because of the actions it was causing, so you can imagine. And of course later on, the Communist Party became the Euro-Communist Party, and it disappeared really as far as that's concerned. But there was a political dimension on the left, and there was a major debate on the left on the issue of calling a general strike against the anti-union laws. And the militant at that time, I wasn't in the militant, but it carried articles in the paper, which, and it's mentioned in Peter Taft's book, where we explain, from our position, that the idea of a general strike in the modern era would be, if it was posed as an open-ended general strike, would pose the question of power. Who runs society? So we advocated, the comrades advocated at the time, the idea of a one-day general strike. And at a certain stage, you might call an open-ended general strike against the anti-unions, against all the attacks on the working class. But it was a part of a serious political debate that was taking place in the real world as a result of what the government and the state was trying to do as far as that's concerned. Almost. And when the Industrialisation Court was in operation, Donaldson, there were strikes in the Manchester engineering factories, and the Donaldson told the engineering union to call those strikes off. And the engineering union's response was, we're going to call out all our members on strike, and the union was fined 50,000 quid by the court. And they called out on strike, or put a notice out, to their 1.5 million members in the engineering union to take strike action against the court. And it would have been an effective general strike, with the effect it would have had on industry. And what happened is all of a sudden at the City of London, 5 bankers got together, yeah, they were bankers, and paid the fine of the AUEW. So frightened were they of the effect of that strike. And whereas, for instance, the T&G Transport and General Workers Union, part of Unite now, their Dockers members were on a strike against containerisation throughout the country, and the TG was fined 5,000 quid and then 50,000 quid for not instructing their shop stewards that were picketing various places over the issue of containerisation. The union was fined that, and Jack Jones paid the fine. And if that had continued, but then later on, in the same struggle, what Rob mentioned, the famous Pentonville five dockers who picketed an East London containerisation depot, they were in prison in the Pentonville prison in West London, North London, and they were imprisoned. And that, I remember I happened to be on a union course up in York University at that stage, and we walked out. And it was happening all over the country. Hundreds of thousands of workers started to walk off the jobs. You can't believe it now, but that's actually what the industry began to shut down. And Teddy's panicked. So despite the Industrial Relations Act imprisoning these five dockers, the general strike began from below. And then the Tory government, like a rabbit out of a hat, produced what's called the official solicitor. Nobody had ever heard of him before, or since. Who then instructed the prison authorities to release the dockers for their own good. So the dockers were released, and there was about 20,000 workers outside the prison jail welcoming the dockers in that. It gives you again, a flavour of what was taking place. So in effect, the anti-union laws became inoperable. The final issue I just mentioned is in the 1972 miners' strike. By the way, there was two big strikes of the miners, 1972 and 1974. Not once was the anti-union laws used against them, because the anti-union laws had to be called upon by the employers. And if the National Coal Board had attempted to use the anti-union laws and asked the court, the Industrial Relations Court, to do something about the strikes, there would have been even bigger struggles as far as that concerned. And in 1972, the Saltley Gate took place, and again I haven't got time to go into it, but sufficient to say that the state was beaten back by tens of thousands of Birmingham workers and the miners coming out and strike and closed the Saltley Gate, which again the comrades can read about in other things. So and of course also in 1972, in the miners' strike, there was the 3-day week. Where, by the way, more production was made in the 3-day week than in the 5-day week. The statistics demonstrate. So there's lots of lessons from that. The key question for us in this discussion, in my view, is what can happen today, how can it be applied, but above all, once the working class, and there's 6.7 million people, members of the trade union movement, they're an enormously powerful organisation, the biggest voluntary organisation in society, and if they're used, if the leadership is given, they can also do to the new trade union law bill what the workers in the 1970s did to the Industrial Relations Act.